Coming up in Locked On Horned Frogs, the TCU offensive line will make or break the offense this season. I'll explain next. This is Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can also subscribe wherever it is you get podcasts in their audio form. We're talking TCU football today. We're going to talk a little offensive line. So, this team is set up well. I think from a skill position standpoint, you're banking on some potential. I wouldn't be shocked if maybe they went out in the portal and found one more outside wide receiver for depth potentially. But you got guys like Savion Williams coming back. You have some players like Blair Conwright and Blake Knoll who didn't play huge roles last year but are experienced and might increase their role this season. And then you have some guys like Jordan Hudson, some young guys like Jordan Hudson, Cordell Russell, DJ Allen, who have shown some flashes. Really, Hudson has shown some flashes on the field. Russell had a great high school career. Allen didn't play last year, but he was a highly rated recruit as well. And then on the inside, JoJo Earl, John Paul Richardson, Jack Best, Jared Wiley. The list goes on. Major Everhart, potentially. There's a lot of guys that can make this thing go. The running back room, I think there's some more concern there, but Trey Sanders, Amani Bailey, there's some good names. Trent Battle, there's some guys that you feel like can have a productive season. Chandler Morris behind center. Now, what could make this engine not work? And that's the offensive line. I mean, you're losing a lot off that offensive line. Alan Ali was a godsend last year as a transfer from SMU. You got on the inside players like Wes Harris and Steve Avila. Avila obviously was an All-American, going to be a high draft pick. Wes Harris was another really experienced player. And they're able to stay healthy throughout the whole season. A.J. Ricker spoke to the media earlier this week. And, if this offense fails to live up to expectations, I think it'll be because they did not protect the quarterback well. And last season, as good as the O-line was, and I think the continuity and the experience was the biggest advantage they had, they did go up against some teams where they struggled to protect Max. In those games, like against Texas Tech, against Georgia, obviously in the national title game, you saw offensive outputs that were decreased. There is nothing you can really do. You can mitigate it to a certain extent, but it is really, really tough to scheme around a bad offensive line. If you don't necessarily have dynamic skill players, or if your quarterback struggles in some areas, that can limit you offensively, but there's creative things you can do to sort of mask that. If you can't block people, there's not much to do except for add extra blockers or get the ball out quick. And that puts your offense in some tough situations because it doesn't allow you to access your full playbook. And so I was curious to see what A.J. Ricker said. John Lands has been working a lot at center. Now he's talked a lot, Coach Ricker has, or he did in the session, about how they're trying to cross-train guys. They want guys to play different positions. So Lands has worked at center. He's also worked at guard. Ezra Dotson, the transfer from Arizona State, has worked at center. They have Willis Patrick from Jackson State, who's an interior offensive lineman. And then you got your tackles on the outside like Brandon Coleman and Andrew Coker. And there's been some talk about kicking them inside from time to time. Marcus Williams is a swing tackle. And so you have some options. What you want to do is you want to get the best five guys on the field and then hope that those players can play together for a significant length of time. I will admit this. I might have been wrong about Garrett Hayes. Garrett Hayes spent some time with the defense this spring, and I thought that was a bad sign for him and in his future on the O-line, because my thought process was, if you're an O-line coach, you're an offensive coach, you're not loaning out one of your main contributors to the defensive line, either for depth purposes or just to see if he might be able to fit there. But, in the spring, you do try things, do experiment things. And it seems like Hayes has been working with the ones and twos since he came back and started working with the offensive line again. So I'll admit that I was probably wrong about that, and it seems like he is part of what they want to do this season. I don't know if he's going to be on the field for 100 snaps or anything like that, but he's getting reps as he's come back to the offensive side of the ball. Tommy Brockermeyer, one of their big recruits that came over, former number 2 player in the country. Ricker said that they're treating him like a freshman. He hasn't played a lot of ball because of injuries, and so they're bringing him along slowly. At this point, I don't think he's a guy that's going to play a lot this season. He might be a project into next year, but there's a ton of potential there. You see the talent, you see the ability, and I think he's someone that down the road could be a huge force on the O-line for this team. You have to be able to protect the quarterback, and you have to run the football well. And if you can do those things, and it all starts with your O-line, then you have a chance to be really successful. Some of you guys asked some questions or had some comments on my last video where I was talking about Josh Hoover and the number 2 QB situation. Tanner McKinney, he was talking about TCU's issues with landing quarterback recruits, either out of high school or in the portal. He said the biggest issue is NIL. Kids only want money. If NIL was not there, I bet they'd have a big name QB, talking about TCU. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a problem. I don't – NIL is still so secretive. Not a lot of schools are being public with what they're doing. I think TCU's doing their best. It seems like they're making an effort to try to take care of the guys that are already on the roster and potentially players in the portal. But, yeah, there's SEC schools that are throwing money around. There's Big 12 schools that are throwing money around that I don't think TCU can really match that. What I'll say about that, though, too, is I think every recruiting situation is different. So, yeah, I see your point, Tanner. I think it's a good one. But I feel like each QB situation – NIL's been a factor in some of them they haven't. And so I'm not sure you can just pinpoint that one issue, but I definitely see what you're saying. Helio said, don't be surprised if Hoover ends up starting. Yeah, I would be shocked if that happened. I know Kendall Browell said it was a competition. I don't see that being the case. I think it's a good sign that Josh Hoover is sitting there as the number 2 QB right now, and it seems like the coaching staff is confident in his ability. But I think that's a little too rich for my blood. I don't think he's going to be a starter this season. I think he's got a future here at TCU, though. But, certainly we can agree to disagree on that. William Royal said he was watching Hoover's interview after spring practice, and it got him thinking about Coach Kaz. He's starting to think Kaz Kazadi might have been one of the best hires for TCU football. He came last year and whipped this program into shape. You hardly hear a player interview without giving credit to Kaz and the S&C staff. Yeah, I think that's an astute observation. I mean, he's had a huge impact on the program. One thing that Sonny Dykes said when he took over was there were a lot of things in place at TCU when he got the job, but one thing that stood out to him almost immediately was they were kind of in the Stone Age when it came to strength and conditioning and nutrition. And so Coach Kazadi and that coaching staff have done a great job of trying to bridge that gap. And I feel like the lack of injuries that you saw last year and their ability to play well in the second half and the fourth quarter of games had a direct correlation with what Kaz did. A couple more comments that I want to get to, but they relate to basketball and baseball. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. When we come back, a TCU basketball player has hit the transfer portal. We'll let you know who that is next. I do want to talk about FanDuel, though. FanDuel is where the game starts. It's the official betting partner of the NBA. NBA playoffs right around the corner. Teams trying to secure those play-in tournament berths. If you want to get involved, you can download the FanDuel app. It's safe. It's secure. It's really easy to use. You can also go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to take advantage of their no-sweat first bet deal. Again, that's no-sweat first bet deal. Put as little as $5 down. You get up to $1,000 in bonus bets. You can bet on the money line. You can do parlays. You can do some prop bets. You can get creative with it, or you can just kind of stick with the standard who wins, by how much, that type of thing. FanDuel, again, official betting partner of the NBA. It's where to go if you want to dip your toes in the sports wagering game, or if you're someone more experienced, you should use FanDuel as well. FanDuel, it's where the game starts, and they're a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. All right, so here on segment 2, a couple of years back, I kind of did this bit or this game on the podcast. I feel like much less people listened to the show back then. So some of you might be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But back in the 2020 offseason, I would sort of do this almost daily update. It was a game show called Who's on the TCU basketball roster, because they had so much turnover after that season. They basically retooled the entire roster under Coach Dixon, and it was, a crazy situation. And now they ended up with a lot of good players, and that was sort of the rebirth of the program in a lot of ways. And that's happening on a smaller level now. They've had some guys transfer in, they've had some players transfer out. So Jameer Nelson Jr. is on his way to TCU via the University of Delaware. He had a huge season there, averaging 20 points a game. Solomon Doumbia, the big man, he is in the portal. So he's going to look elsewhere, see if he can find a place to be. And then as of yesterday, Shahade Wells is also in the portal. Shahade, came over from UTA a few years ago and was a big-time scorer there at UT Arlington. Was injured his first season at TCU, came in this year, had averaged 6 points a game, basically 5.9 points per game, and 2.3 assists per game as well. Shot 44% from the field, was a 33% three-point shooter. So, you're losing a guy that can score. Now, Shahade, there's a lot of potential. He was one of those guys that I always thought, man, if he can get cooking, that can be a major boost scoring the basketball because they could use some of that firepower off the bench. But for the most part, even, when Mike Miles was out, it just wasn't super consistent. He could never find a way to really, put string good games together, put his best scoring effort out there night after night. Now, we'll always have that game at Allen Fieldhouse where he and the rest of the team just shot the lights out, which was awesome. And there were some other games this season where he stepped up, but was never as consistent of a threat as you would have thought. I'm a little surprised by this just because with Mike Miles, and I think Damian Baugh is probably going to leave. I don't know that for sure. He hasn't announced exactly what his intentions are yet, but I think he's going to be gone. There's an opportunity for guards, but I feel like bringing in Jameer Nelson Jr., I'm sure they've been pretty honest with Shahade about what other plans they have as far as adding guards in the portal. And so maybe he just looks at it and says, you know what, there's not much of a place for me here. I got limited eligibility left. I need to go somewhere where I can get on the floor and play. So best of luck to him. He's in the portal. Of course, anytime you hit the portal, you can come back, but that seems like a good buy. And, we'll see where he lands over the next few weeks and months. A player that hit the portal yesterday who went through, kind of a tough season, had some injuries, but is reportedly, there's some mutual interest between him and TCU, is Avery Anderson, the point guard from Oklahoma State, averaged 11 points a game and 3 assists last year. Decent shooter, did not have a good year shooting the basketball this past season, only 18%, but he was dealing with a broken hand for a lot of the season. In 2021, he shot 32% from three. In 2020, he shot 32% from three. So pretty consistent there. Has averaged, 11 or 12 points basically his entire career when he's had good minutes. So that's a name to know. That's a name to watch as TCU might make, a run at him. There's also 2 Baylor guards in the portal, LJ Cryer and Dale Bonner. LJ Cryer is a guy that can fill it up. Even though right now it seems like K-State might be the leader in the clubhouse, his former coach Jerome Tang is the head man there at Kansas State. And then I haven't seen who Dale Bonner might be interested in, but those are some other Big 12 names that are in the portal that TCU has some familiarity with. There was a comment a couple days ago from a user that said, can you talk about whatever is going on in basketball? All the players that have left, Shahade and Lampkin, have talked about issues and stuff. So if Shahade alleged any issues with the coaching staff, I must have missed that. If you want to send that along to me, I'm at Simcox Steven on Twitter. The show Twitter handle is at LockedOnTCU. I didn't get that sense. I didn't see that he had alleged any sort of misconduct or issues with the coaching staff. Yes, Eddie Lampkin did allege that there was some comments made that may have had some racial bias by Jamie Dixon and just general mistreatment. He deleted that Instagram post, though, and, I don't want to completely dismiss what he said. I just feel like nobody else on the team necessarily came out and backed him up. It didn't really feel like the team quit on Coach Dixon and that coaching staff, and we didn't hear anything else about it. So I'm not sure what was going on with Eddie and Coach Dixon, but it didn't seem to be something that was a widespread issue through the whole team. But if I'm missing something or I didn't catch something, please let me know, and I'll be happy to talk about it on tomorrow's episode. When we come back, we'll take a quick break, and then TCU baseball got a victory over Tarleton yesterday, closer than the experts would have thought, but they did get it done. We'll talk about that next. TCU baseball took down Tarleton 9-8 on Tuesday. They were down 8-4, I think, going into the fifth inning of that game. Not a great pitching performance. Steven Stoutberg got the start, and then they went to Braden Sloan. He got touched up a little bit. Mason Speaker got a few innings. And then finally they slowed things down. They went to Ben Albert, who's been, a big-time reliever for them this year. And maybe the most positive sign from the game, Garrett Wright came in the eighth inning and shut things down and got a couple strikeouts in the ninth in a one-run game, got the save. Garrett looks healthy. He's throwing his fastball for strikes, and that allows him to throw that slider, that wipeout slider in the dirt that fools hitters. He's never going to be he's not Mr. Command. He's going to be a little wild, but that's expected. I mean, his stuff is so electric. He does seem to be throwing the ball better, though, and feels like he's in a much better space mentally and physically than he was earlier this season. So that's significant, because if he can be a dude at the back end of that bullpen, then he gives you some more options in the middle innings and allows you to just kind of say, okay, we have a closer, which is a big deal. The team hit the ball okay, rallied and scored some runs. They touched up a Tarleton pitcher late in that game who was struggling to find the plate. They get a tough series with Oklahoma State starting on Thursday. And one more subplot from that game. So Ryan Vanderhyde threw in Tuesday night's contest against Tarleton, threw about 20 pitches. And so I asked the guys from the Lipton Drinking Club, which is another podcast that I encourage you to check out. They do a really good job covering baseball. I said, who's going to start Thursday? Because my first thought when Vanderhyde comes in the game is, okay, is this the end of his Friday night starting role? Is he now in the bullpen, at least temporarily? And Jacob Sailors from that podcast said, no, he still thinks it's Ryan. He essentially thought they were just trying to get him a live bullpen session. He got shelled pretty good by Texas Tech and only won a couple innings last Friday night. So that would make sense to say, hey, maybe he can get 20 or 30 pitches here and just feel good about himself going into that contest against Oklahoma State. But we'll see how that plays out. TCU, Oklahoma State, big series at Lupton, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We'll have coverage of that as well as spring football and much more here on Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.